Today we'll be considering, is Obama a weak president? Now it seems that in recent times most presidents have been accused of being weak. So it's important to consider how much are the criticisms of Obama due to the weakness of the office of the president itself, and how much are due to his actions or his lack of action. So first of all, I'd like to consider why are presidents often accused of being weak, and how many different reasons can you think of. So pause the video and have a think about those two questions. So there are 6 key reasons why presidents are generally considered to be weak. First of all, there is constitutional intent, i.e. it's what the framers of the Constitution intended in setting up the office of the presidency, that it should be weak. Secondly, there's a perception that Americans generally prefer a weak president. This whole idea they were looking for a leader rather than a ruler, and someone who only exists to persuade people to act. Thirdly, presidents often overstate their power, making out during an electoral cycle they would do more than they can actually achieve. Fourthly, there's something called the cycle of disillusionment, where people become more and more frustrated with their current president and then build up the hopes for a new president again. There's increased partisanship in the US, so as the country becomes more polarised and more partisan, there's less likelihood of the president succeeding, and divided government has become a lot more common in the US system. So the first reason for the weakness of the president is constitutional intent. The Constitution is clear the president does not have a great deal of individual power. Richard Neustadt, writing in 1960, made it clear that the presidency was a weak office, and in fact the Constitution had set up Congress as the main power in the government, and any power the president had was limited by the checks and balances of Congress. So the founding fathers did not want a ruler. This is what they'd escaped from in Europe. They wanted a leader with clearly limited powers with checks and balances. And this is often characterized as the power to persuade, as they have to bring Congress with them. And this was stated by James Pittman, who stated that the presidency is not a powerful office in itself. It's also not what Americans usually want. They do not want a strong president. So it's inbuilt into many Americans to want the power of the president to be limited. This is often the reason people say that individuals do split ticket voting in the US. They do not want to give too much power to the president or actually to Congress. And organisations like the Tea Party movement are predicated on the idea of a weak federal government and the idea of having more power to the states. Now, it's interesting because at times there has been a push for a powerful president, such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, in the 1930s and 40s. And immediately after FDR, they put in place term limits to limit the power of the president. So, although clearly at times people want a powerful president, the general perception is that it is better for the president's power to be limited. Now, a curious part of this is that it's often presidents' own fault for overstating how much they can actually achieve when in office. So, overpromising during the election is very, very common, as the president makes out that they can achieve a lot of things when in office, when in fact, as we've already seen, their powers are very limited. So George Bush Sr. very clearly promised no new taxes when he became president in 1988 and could not deliver on this and had to go back on this promise. Obama himself was certainly guilty of this when he was swung in on a landslide victory in 2008 on a hope and change agenda, making out like he was going to put in place a great deal of changes. He promised to end oil dependence in the Middle East, close Guantanamo Bay, and to intervene in Syria if chemical weapons were used, and then was not able to achieve any of these things, showing a weakness of the president and making him look weaker for having promised to do them. And we also talk about a cycle of disillusionment. So there's a general perception that people become more disillusioned with the president throughout their time in office, partly due to the promises they make before they come into power, which it soon becomes clear they cannot deliver. So this is partly due to the hype and over-expectation with a new president. But it's certainly true that approval ratings drop with all presidents. And actually, in Obama's first term, his highest approval rating was in his first month and his lowest towards the end of the third year, as people went through a cycle of disillusionment where they slowly became more disillusioned with him. And to a certain extent, you can see that all the way up to 2015-16, where presumably a new candidate will come along who will pick up on or emphasise hope or some kind of change to try and re-win the electorate. As with several problems in the current system in America, partisanship has had a large impact. So as the USA becomes more partisan, it is harder for the president not to be identified by 50% of the population as a leader of the other party. Now if we look at individual examples, Eisenhower had a 47% approval rating in 1957, so quite late on in his term, from Democrats, whereas Obama had an 11% approval rating amongst Republicans in 2011, clearly showing that in the late 50s, people from the other party could appreciate a powerful or strong president and you could have high approval ratings from the other party, whereas now partisanship has become a lot more of an issue. And this is also because partisanship has seen the power to persuade disappear, as Congress repeatedly descends into gridlock, as we are seeing now, where Obama and Democrats cannot pass any legislation, but also Obama has threatened to veto Republican legislation. Now these issues with partisanship also link into the problems around divided government. Now it's becoming the norm for government to be divided, so no one party controls both chambers and the presidency. If we look at Obama's time in office, he had a unified government 2008 to 2010, but 2010 to 16, so the majority of his time in office, there has been divided government. Now, in fact, of the last 36 years, there's been 8.5 where government has been united. So this has changed over recent years. Both Lyndon Baines Johnson and John F. Kennedy had unified government when they were in power. And it's very clear to see that a divided government makes it a lot harder to pass legislation through Congress. So, conclusions. Mostly these accusations of Obama being weak have come from the right, and so are highlighting again this issue around partisanship, that the right see him as the leader of the Democrats and so an enemy. But it is fair to say he has struggled to get past legislative gridlock after 2010. And at times he has seemed to show ineffective leadership, particularly after the Sandy Hook massacre, where many felt that some form of gun control would be able to be brought in due to the national mood. You can also argue that he showed ineffective leadership over Syria, Ukraine, and Iraq, showing that in terms of foreign policy, he has not been that an effective leader, which is where often presidents show their effectiveness in foreign policy where they're less limited by Congress. And there's been embarrassment over the revelations from the NSA and the whistleblowing, and the failures to close Guantanamo Bay, a key promise he made in 2008. However, it's possible that history will be kinder to him. There are no huge mistakes so far in Obama's presidency, such as the Iraq War will tarnish George Bush's presidency for many years to come, and arguably his work on Iran and Cuba may come to be looked on favourably as he looks to improve relations with them in his last time in power. And also, of course, in 2008 to 2010, domestically he had some successes with the Affordable Care Act and the fiscal stimulus. So, in summary, Obama is often accused of being weak. And this is largely because of his failures in foreign and domestic policy being highlighted by different commentators. However, he has started to see some successes in foreign policy, and Obamacare could be seen to be a success in the future. And actually, Presidents are often accused of being weak for many reasons, often things out of their control, such as the Constitution tends them to be weak. Americans also want them to be weak. They tend to overstate what they can achieve. People become disillusioned with them. America is very partisan, and the government is increasingly divided. So, what do you think? What are the arguments that Obama has been weak in his time in office? Are these arguments Obama's fault, or are they things out of his control? And how has Obama actually shown strength, or shown him to be a powerful president? And lastly, overall, do you think he has been a weak or a strong president, and why? This has been a Flip Your History video. More information and more videos are available on TES if you search Flip Your History. Or for more information about Flip Learning and my Flip Learning journey, go to Twitter at Flip Your History or my blog flipyourhistory.wordpress.com. Thank you for listening.